It all started one summer afternoon in August. My best friend Mike invited me to his house. Mike was the type of kid you'd call a nerd. He always got good grades, wore glasses, had freckles, and believed in things like dragons and magic. One of Mike's favorite things to do was perform magic for me. Every time I'd come over, he'd perform magic, but this magic trick would be the one that I'd never forget. When I got to Mike's house, he said, "I have a new magic trick to show you. And it's the best one." He grabbed my hand, and we went into the living room where he had a large box in front of his family photo. It was all 4 of his family members in that picture: Mike, Josh, and his mom and dad. The box was about his size, so we could fit in it, and his older brother Josh was standing next to it. So I sat down on a couch, and Mike started introducing the name of his magic trick. It was called the vanishing. Josh opened the door to the large box where nothing was inside, and Mike walked in. After Josh closed the door again, he then said some weird words and yelled. Poof! Josh slowly opened the box, and Mike was no longer in it. However, I was in the 7th grade, so I was smart enough to know that under the box was a trapdoor, so he could climb down out of it. I looked down at the bottom of the box, but to my surprise, nothing was there. No door, no secret, no Mike. Just at that moment, my mom called and said that I needed to come home right now. I said bye to Josh, grabbed my backpack, and yelled, "Nice trick, Mike, gotta go." Everything was fine just until the next day. The next day, Mike didn't invite me, but I thought of going to his house again. I ran up to his house, stood in front of the door, and rang the doorbell 3 times. His dad came out and said, "Oh, hello, nice to meet you." He acted like he'd never seen me before. It was weird, but I asked, "Good afternoon, sir. Is Mike home?" Then I could see his confused face, and he answered, "Mike? Who's Mike?" I felt stupid at that moment, as if I had come to the wrong house. I then quickly asked, "Your son Mike? You have 2 sons?" During the explanation of the situation, I felt irritated, so I pushed him to the side to get into the living room. "Josh," I said, pointing to the photo, and then my eyes widened. Mike wasn't in the photo. I was pointing to nothing, which would have been where Mike should be standing in that picture. I panicked, and I couldn't believe what was going on here. I then said, "Your son Mike, he has good grades and he's good at magic." Oh, the box. I thought that everyone was playing a prank on me or something. But he looked extremely confused and even terrified. He looked at me as if I was some kind of lunatic. So I ran upstairs to check the box, and I opened the door thinking that I must be dreaming. The room was full of bookshelves and beanbags all in a circle. It was just a cozy reading room. I was horrified. I kept saying, "No, it can't be," over and over. At that moment, Josh came in the room. I thought this was my last chance. I quickly took out my phone, thinking that I could remind Mike of them by showing selfies that I took with Mike before. However, when I did, he was in none of the pictures. The one where I gave him a hug, where we went to the other friend's birthday party and took a picture with the clown. Nothing was there. It was like he never even existed before. And I felt that moment was like a nightmare. To this day, there is literally no one who remembers Mike in my town. I still can't believe what happened to Mike. But I definitely believe that Mike is real. And he must be somewhere. My name is Kyla. This story is about a piano that was in my elementary school when I was a kid. My friends and I used to record random videos in my school's basement. Most of the time, the basement's lights were off because hardly anyone went there. And the reason was that that place was scary and sometimes smelled really bad. The basement was completely dark. We slowly walked into the basement with our phone lights on. I was nervous, but my friends were already walking ahead of me, so I just followed them. We were a group of 5, so I felt like I shouldn't be scared since I was with them. My friend Michael was in the front since he was the bravest and also the one recording on his phone. I was in the very back, holding onto my friend Kate's shirt. There was a room just beside the basement's wall, and inside of it was a grand piano. Nothing else, only the piano. We went inside that room first. We were all quiet, and you could only hear our heavy breathing as we walked through the basement. But we didn't hear anything. Then, out of nowhere, Michael said, "Boring." It took us around 3 minutes to reach the end of the basement. Michael put his phone back in his pocket, and we all started walking back in the long basement. We finally returned to the main gate of our school and sat on a bench. Everyone was focused on Michael as he pulled out his phone and started playing the recording. It was quiet at first, and then all that could be heard were our whispers as we tried to figure out whether or not we should continue with the recording. Then all of our eyes widened when we heard a sound coming from what seemed like just beside the basement. We couldn't believe what we just heard, so we paused the video, rewound it, and played it again. The sound came from the grand piano. It was playing a creepy song. And at that moment, Michael almost dropped his phone. We were all shocked and scared. We didn't say anything for a while. I'm 100% positive that we didn't hear that piano playing as we walked through the basement. It was definitely quiet, and the scariest thing was that the piano was still playing when Michael said, "Boring." The recording was around 3 minutes long, and when the recording was done playing, we were all speechless. This was many years ago, but to this day, I still don't have an explanation for what happened. Maybe someone went to that room and played it, but if so, why couldn't we hear it while we were walking through the basement? We also didn't see anyone else down there, and why did we only hear it when we played the recording? I am still confused about that incident. This happened in the middle of last year. At that time, I was at home with my boyfriend, Dan, watching TV. Dan was deeply concentrated on what the TV screen was showing. So I was about to start making a romantic atmosphere, but then I heard a knock at the door. I got pretty pissed off as it interrupted, but got up anyway and opened the door. I lived with one of our friends, so at that moment, I thought it would be my friend, but to my surprise, it was a man around the same age as me. He looked a little bit tired and was forcing a smile on his face. He was all sweaty, and his eyes were red as if from crying, but it wasn't my business to ask. "Oh, hello," the stranger said with a wide smile, taking his hand out for me to shake. "Hi," I said, looking at his hand and back at him. "Can I use your bathroom, please?" he asked, still having this huge smile plastered on his face. Before I could say anything, though, Dan came behind me and told the guy that indeed he could use the bathroom. The man went in there, and Dan and I just went back to the couch and waited for him. Then I heard some sounds like water pouring in the bathtub. After 10 minutes, I slowly started to get curious as he didn't come out yet. I told Dan that I should check on him, but he told me to wait a little bit more. So I just waited, and 20 minutes later, he still didn't come out. There was just silence in the bathroom. After 30 minutes, Dan decided that he'd check the bathroom. However, having a bad feeling, I went along with him just to be sure that nothing happened to him. "Hey, is everything all right?" I knocked at the door of the bathroom, but there was no response. I repeated the actions, but this time I knocked louder and yelled. Dan told me to wait a little longer, but I refused. I pressed on the handle of the door, expecting it to be locked. But to my surprise, it wasn't. I couldn't believe what I saw in front of me. To my horror, there was blood splattered on the floor everywhere, and the bathtub was filled up with a red liquid as well. With a lifeless body in it, the smell of blood filled the bathroom, and I wondered how I couldn't smell that outside. I told Dan to call 911 while I went over to the body to check his pulse. But when I got closer to it, I noticed that a razor blade was shoved deep in his neck. He was just dead. After half an hour, 911 arrived with the cops. They took his body, and we had to give our report to the cops. To this day, I became more paranoid about strangers, especially since I'm positive that letting a stranger use your bathroom is not safe and just nonsense. So don't let a stranger come in, ever. This happened to me last summer. My best friend and I went to Ibiza for a week. Once we checked into our hotel on the first day, we threw our bags in our room and drove our rented car to the nearest supermarket. On our way there, we talked about the hotel, which was located in the very old suburban part of the city. It was really dirty. It just had an overall weird vibe to it. My friend was really bummed out about it, but we agreed that it wasn't going to ruin our excitement for this trip. Later that night, around 3 a.m., after coming back from a club to the area where we stayed, we couldn't find our hotel. We were completely drunk and probably walked around the streets in circles. My friend laughed a lot, stopped, and then pointed at a tall garden fence. Through it, we saw the hotel building. It was right behind the garden, so without putting much thought into it, we tried to climb over the fence. My friend managed to succeed, but I fell and hurt my right leg quite a bit. He helped me up, and we stood in the middle of a bunch of green bushes. "What the?" my friend murmured. All of a sudden, I looked up, and there were a bunch of tombstones. We were standing right between two walls, and at the end of the walls, there was a small chapel. The door was wide open, and from a distance, we could see that it was full of lit candles. I was about to ask my friend why the lights were on, but that drunk idiot suddenly started to laugh and walked toward the chapel with big awkward steps. Due to my injured leg, I couldn't really catch up with him. I almost felt like puking. so I looked down for a moment. And when I looked up again, he was standing inside the chapel. I took a few more steps and stopped as I saw his face look completely gray. "What's wrong?" I asked, but he gave me no response. Suddenly, he raised his hand and signaled that I should back off and be quiet. He leaned his face a bit forward as if he was trying to see something in the room. At that point, I was really scared, so I just took as many steps back as I could while still looking at him. Then I heard something, the sound of footsteps. Maybe 4 or 5 people were directly in front of him. He immediately turned around and started to sprint as fast as he possibly could while yelling, "Run, run, go." I could hear the footsteps getting closer and closer, and whoever was chasing us was yelling some words in Latin. My friend caught up to me just as I was about to climb the fence. He helped me out and gave me a push forward. The footsteps were still right behind us, however. When we hit the ground on the other side of the fence and looked back between the bars into the green bushes, there was no one to be seen, no one to be heard. As frightened as we were, we glanced in every direction looking for them, but there was nothing. We then got back on our feet and eventually went back to the hotel. Our legs were shivering. My friend entered the lobby first, and as I was just about to enter too, I looked back at the street we just came from and saw 5 figures standing in the darkness. They wore long black clothes and all stared directly at me. I got scared, so I immediately got in and went up to my room. Our hotel room was located on the 5th floor, so I looked down the window into the streets, but I couldn't see any of the figures. I remained extremely paranoid during the rest of the night, our stay, but we never encountered anything similar. Even to this day, we haven't talked about the incident. This happened about 4 years ago in December of 2015. My 5 friends and I have our own business editing photos and videos for social media content creators. And because of this, we tend to have a lot of spare time on our hands. We used to go on road trips to a local lake that has a few nice spots to camp at and a ski resort. We usually went there on our days off. One week, the 6 of us finished all of our projects early, so we had a few days off. We decided to drive to the lake. I won't be using their real names for obvious reasons, so I'll call them Kevin, Stephen, Brittany, Katie, and Josh. Katie and Brittany rode in Katie's old sports car, and Stephen and I rode on our motorcycles. Usually, Kevin and Josh took Stephen's Jeep, but on this trip, Josh had just bought a new Sprinter van, which the previous owner had converted into a 2-person camper, so Kevin decided to ride with Josh. When we arrived, we skied, had some really delicious camping food, and listened to Josh brag about his new van. It was a pretty normal trip. On the last day, we all packed up to head home. About 2 hours into the trip back home, we were a little hungry, so we stopped at a gas station to grab some snacks. We all parked our vehicles outside and went into the gas station together, which was kind of foolish. We were in there maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and the car's door was left open the whole time. When we came outside, we had a huge shock waiting for us. Josh's van was gone. There was a huge dent on the side of Katie's car and another dent on the side of an old truck in the parking lot, which I assume belonged to an employee. We were so panicked at that moment, so we immediately called the police. But since we were a little off the grid, the police took 15 minutes to arrive, and by then, we knew the chances of them being able to find Josh's van were slim to none. The scariest thing about it was that Kevin brought his work laptop on the trip, and I knew that Kevin didn't have a password set up on it. We waited for another 2 or so hours while the police searched the area, but they couldn't find anything. They told us to go home and they would contact us if they found the stolen van. Kevin and Josh rode with the girls in Katie's car while Stephen and I rode our motorcycles, following them very closely. We didn't stop once during the remaining 3-hour trip home. Fast forward 2 or 3 weeks later, we received a frantic call from Josh. He said that the police contacted him and that the van had been found. All 6 of us showed up to see the van, and the van had somehow been rolled on its side and was left in a ditch near the highway, about an hour from where it had been stolen. Once they got it out of the ditch and flipped it upright, the police let us look inside to see if we could salvage any personal items. Sure enough, Kevin's laptop was gone, along with a set of kitchen knives that Josh had used for making kebabs. The most disturbing thing, though, was that once we got the busted driver's side door open, we saw that both seats were stained a deep dark red in multiple places, and the dashboard had slash marks all over it. At that point, we were really afraid of the van. Josh let the police take the van for further inspection, but we never heard what happened to it or who the blood belonged to.